Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a very special edition of the Livestream Hour. I'm Christopher Ludwig, Editor-in-Chief at Automotive Multimedia, and it's my pleasure here to welcome you to our discussion today, which we're going to be focusing on the tier supply chain, and particularly the tier supplier road to recovery as we begin slowly but surely to restart production in different parts of the world and face a host of specific challenges that many tier suppliers and their OEM partners and logistics and equipment providers need to work together to solve. So I'm going to be joined by a very special panel. We're going to have a lot of time for Q&A. We'll be doing some of our global roundup as we often do, and it's going to be a really great show. So very excited to have many of you with us. So let me just tell you a little bit again about our show as we kick off here. So I'd like to again welcome you to the Livestream Hour. Also proud to be working together with our festival partner, CNW Courier Network, a very important premium freight and expedited service provider. It's a very important service clearly at these times of crisis. So thanks again to CNW, our partner there. I'm going to be joined today by our special guests. We've got three really important logistics leaders and supply chain leaders in the automotive space, North America and globally. I'll be joined by Matt Pohlman, who's the head of global logistics and integrated supply chain at Webco, an important commercial vehicle supplier amongst others. Jeffrey Estes, who's the general manager of parts supply at Toyota North America, responsible for aspects of both inbound and service parts logistics across the region for Toyota. And also very pleased that we'll be welcoming Maxim Serov, Supply Chain Director for North America at Benteler Group, yet another global, major global tier one, and Maxim oversees all the supply chain operations in North America. So again, we're going to be a really fantastic panel. And before I kind of kick us off and just a little flash of what we kind of have ahead, we'll go through our global update as we do each week, sharing with you some of the key insights of developments happening around the world. I'll lay down some of the specific tier supplier challenges that we see developing in the market before we move on to our Q&A. But before that, let's start again with a poll just to get your view of what you see happening across specifically the supply chain for tier suppliers. So if I can ask the audience to vote, the question will be coming up any second for you now. What is the biggest risk across the tier supplier supply chain right now? Do you think it's unreliable OEM production schedules and call-offs? Is it supply and logistics bottlenecks? Is it delayed or canceled launches? Is it the adjusting to the new safety measures, including PPE equipment? Or is it financially distressed tier suppliers? So if you can join us by giving your opinion now, we'll share it with our audience. Of course, this reflects some of the challenges that we're picking up in our conversations with the tier supply chain and with OEMs, but very keen to get the view of the global audience that we have joined with us today. So I'm just going to allow another moment to close the poll, and I'm going to tell you now the results. And pretty clear there. 34, about almost 35% of our audience sees the unreliable OEM production schedules and call-offs as the biggest issue. So that's something I'm going to talk about more during the course of the hour, during the course of our session here today, particularly with our specialists. Supply and logistics bottlenecks also getting about 20%, but actually second to financially distressed tier 2 and tier 3. So quite a few of the risks out there pretty much seem to be resonating with you, and again, we're going to come back to talk more about them in detail. So let's talk a little bit about the what's happening across the world. This is something we do every week on the live stream hour, share with you some of the latest developments across the industry. Let's start with China, where it all began and where it's furthest ahead. Maybe some positive news in particular as the April sales come in, and we do see signs of uptick here. A number of Chinese manufacturers have already reported increases for April, including SAIC with the joint ventures with GM and Volkswagen. Brands like Nissan and Volvo have also seen some growth. The question is whether this sustains as the market picks back up. Will it dip down, or will we see demand made back up? but certainly it continues somewhat positive direction in the wake of the crisis, which of course froze the market in particular in February. Some of the characteristics are beginning to change. We're seeing more digital sales channels, so more people are interacting digitally with dealers and purchasing their cars online, and that's particularly interesting development, acceleration in China. The PMI overall is positive, although there's perhaps a few signs that could be pulling back. And I think one of the issues we've been highlighting is the potential of supply shortages, be that out of Europe or other regions which supply ports to China. So far, it's robust. We haven't heard reports of serious issues. It's holding up. But you know, I think what the next weeks to come, the sustainability of the production in other regions will indicate how well that continues. Lots of logistics disruptions still in and out of China in terms of blank sailings, air freight capacity, search for alternative routes. So the logistics picture is still challenging, but certainly the economic picture is more positive, although some geopolitical risks certainly identified from the tensions between US and China continuing. Turning to EMEA and Europe, it's a continuing story of restarts. The question really, certainly to my mind, and I'm sure lots of you out there, is when and if the demand will follow, given the situation in which we're opening up into. So I won't read them all out here, but you can see continuing levels of OEMs restarting from Porsche to Mercedes and parts of Romania, even parts of Italy seeing more, and we've seen a few plants in Morocco starting to open again following the European openings. More to come in the next 2 weeks, where we'll see more or less the majority of major brands begin some level of production. Almost all of it is at low levels, something like one shift, anything from 10 to 20% capacity to start. Plans to ramp up maybe to 40–50%, but that will be very dependent on demand. We're starting to see the initial pictures of just how devastating April was in Europe. This is not surprising, but nonetheless, the numbers speak for themselves. Pretty much shut off in the UK, Italy, Spain, at nearly 97% or so down. Pretty significant falls elsewhere as well. Germany's positive, if you like, just 61% down. Did open its dealers back up April 20th, whereas the other dealers have been closed throughout. So even where dealers are opening back up, pretty low activity from what we've observing and hearing so far. And countries like Germany and France do not seem in a rush to implement incentives whilst they're only gradually phasing down lockdowns or gradually loosening lockdowns. So the demand question is still there. What we see in Europe is that the coordination between the supply chain, synchronization, slow ramp ups, if you like, seem to be being managed in some way, not perfectly, but they are being managed in a way that the supply chain is sustaining. But there's a big question about whether demand and when the demand will be there to sustain that. We've heard some stories of some plants shutting down now because of demand issues being so low. We're also seeing delays to launches. In the news today that BMW will delay its Hungary plant for an additional year. So it's a question, if you like, of supply might be there at the moment, but demand may not be. Almost a little bit of the inversion, potentially, maybe oversimplifying it, but in North America, where the demand picture may have a few more bright spots than anticipated, but the supply disruption, at least in the very short term, looks to be pretty significant. So we see more OEMs, especially in the South, getting going. Last week already kicked off with Mercedes, and we see BMW, Hyundai, Kia, and the other Mercedes-Benz plants so South Carolina went last week. No, sorry. Alabama went last week, South Carolina goes this week. So the South is getting going in a few places. Next week, and we'll hear more about this from Jeff, some plans with Toyota, also Honda, and Volvo. And then kind of hot off the press news, FCA last night confirming, GM just today confirming that their start plan is May 18th. For most plants, it's not every plant, we'll come on to that, but the most plants will start up in some way the May 18th. No dates yet from Ford, Volkswagen, and Nissan has a tentative mid-May. So the plans are moving, but there's still a lot of uncertainty in the supply chain, and this is changing day to day. So you know, some questions even as of a few days ago of whether Michigan would open fully with its own stay-at-home order in place to the end of the month, and whether that would even allow the Detroit and indeed suppliers in the state to produce. That is still something of a question, but FCA and GM obviously going ahead, so seem to be working in coordination there. Other uncertainty in a few other states about when that might be allowed, and particularly in Mexico, where the federal government has said that the industry can start on May 18th, but some states may prolong that order, and still some questions at the border. From what I'm understanding, the Canadian unions still need to approve some of these return plans, so they are still a bit uncertain. And for lots of other reasons, which I'm going to come on to with our panel, there's some other challenges certainly in the supply chain in terms of which may well disrupt that. Some of the sales figures which have come in, these are not complete, but we see OEMs down more in the 40 to 50% range in April, kind of reflecting that there wasn't a federal lockdown, so some states could sell more. Is there pent-up demand? Will there be some room for that? Positive question potentially. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but in the very short term, could face some supply disruptions to hold that back, at least in the coming months. So interesting and very fast developing picture. Just a quick snapshot of some of the things elsewhere. South Korea, more plants idled again because of demand, including GM Korea and Hyundai. Japan still has a lot of its plants shut down because of the state of emergency. Some news out of India were developments where some of the green zones can start to restart industrial production, and that include Maruti Suzuki and Hyundai opening in a limited way this week. Still lots of disruption across the supply chain there, but there's some things getting back going. And broadly speaking, in Asia, we see a lot of hiccups and challenges. PMI is at record lows in markets, and I think we're likely to see lots of different areas where that touches on the supply chain, touching some nerves, if you like, whether it's a wire harness out of the Philippines or parts and such out of Thailand. This could come and have implications as we move further into the restart process. Just worth noting that Brazil and Russia continue to have high levels of outbreak and may well see some extended closures. So that, if you like, continues our global snapshot. We try and give you that each week just to give you some hot headlines all kind of in one place and give us a chance to dig in more during the discussion. But I wanted to come on more now to the issue at hand, if you like, which is the tier supply chain, which is what, of course, we're going to spend time talking about with our excellent panel today. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details here because we're going to talk through them, but here we've laid out some of the big issues that we're hearing from our network, which are being reported and which we're seeing across the supply chain. We've identified that issue on production schedules. Obviously, there's the regional issues, questions around inventory, how long that will last, lots of issues on ocean shipping, air freight, border crossing, and of course that adjustment to health and safety is a significant one. We could see some labor shortages. So these are some of the operational issues that we certainly see, and I'm very keen to get the panel and indeed the audience's view on them. And what I would say to you and the audience is, do please let us know your comments, send them in the questions. We'll be trying to put them to our panel as much as we can get to, and if we can't get to it, we'll share them and we'll look into them in other ways, be it through content or further live streams. More at a macro level, this is clearly a big issue and was raised about 30% of it in the vote, is the liquidity issue. Suppliers were under margin pressure well before the crisis began, and partly to fund some major new technology investments. They're taking a major hit now, and we can see that in some of the early reports that have come out. But the bigger issue, now that we're 45, 2 months, days past the shutdown, and payment cycles would be coming into play, we're likely to see some of the suppliers feeling the pinch a lot more. Anecdotally, we can already see a few insolvencies that took place today, this week. Veritas, as a supplier in Germany, filed for insolvency. Wouldn't be surprised to see quite a few more coming up, and that will pose some significant risks. Could see some necessity financial assistance from other companies to do that, or other kind of financial assistance, and perhaps over the longer term, if you like, a bigger move in M&A and consolidation. Could that lead, for example, to this combination of capacity utilization being low, lower parts availability, consolidation? Could see a picture where we have some higher component prices over time. So it's a complex picture. That is, if you like, just scratching the surface of the challenges that the market is facing. That was my way of just setting the scene for what's to come. It's now with that I'm really excited welcome to the stage our panel. So if I can connect to welcome Jeff Estes from Toyota, Matt Coleman from Webco, and Maxim Serov from Benteler. So Matt, I can see you've joined us. Jeff, great to have you here, and there's Maxim as well. So gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today to share some thoughts and insight with our audience. Great to have you all again.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. So where I thought we'd start would be to just get a bit of a snapshot. I gave some insight into the general outline of the industry right now, but can you each give us a brief overview of where your companies are right now in the restart process, in your operations? Obviously, I know there are different levels here, and maybe I'll ask you to start, Jeff, since at the OEMs, the kind of things start with the OEM and kind of move down from there.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Chris. First, let me express my gratitude to all the frontline workers that are really, battling this crisis, right? I think we all owe them a huge debt of our gratitude, and they're risking their lives to protect others. So certainly want to give those people their proper gratitude. From our standpoint, I can really speak to North America. I think we recently announced a little bit of a delay to our original intent to restart on May 4th in North America. Now we're planning to have limited production next week of May 11th week at each of our North American facilities. We're not really going to produce a lot of volume next week. I think like everyone now, we're just really trying to understand as we bring our members back, what this new production world will look like. So next week we'll focus on getting members back safely, understanding the safety protocols and understanding how they can interact and actually begin working together. So we have some limited production plans at each of the facilities next week, and then our intent is the week of May 18th to really start a logistics network and start doing our pickup from our suppliers again. So that's pretty much where we intend to go.
So I'll hear from the other panelists first, and maybe we'll touch on a few of those issues. But maybe you can start with Maxim. Go with Maxim next.
Yeah, hello Chris, hello to everyone. So basically, just maybe a few words about the Benteler. So for who doesn't know Benteler, so we are the global tier 1 supplier. So originally from Germany, Paderborn. So here in the US, we have a regional headquarters in Auburn Hills, the Detroit metro area. So we supply the components and the models in the area of chassis, body, engines, and the exhaust systems for almost all the OEMs. So in North America, we have 10 production facilities in 7 locations. In Mexico, in the US. So as of today, we have only one facility, which is in South Carolina. This is our just-in-sequence plant for BMW, who has safely restarted on May 4th. So however, the volume is quite low. So it's around 26% from the pre-crisis volume. So the ramp up is very smooth. So other plants in the US are doing a little bit of service. So the service is considered as essential. So this is allowed. And there are no activities in Mexico so far. So most of the customers, as you just mentioned, so are going to restart on week 21, which is May 18th. So as soon as the home orders in Michigan, for example, will be lifted. So we, as a tier 1 suppliers, we want to restart 1 week prior OEMs, just to have some time to be prepared to ensure the smooth restart. So however, at least in Michigan, this request was not yet confirmed by the government. So we're looking forward for that. So in Mexico, the situation is unclear so far. So again, we hope that we can restart on May 18th. So because currently we have the coverage is around 2 weeks. So to keep the plant shut down longer is not sustainable, really. So, but let's see. So from the manpower perspective, according to our survey, so the employees are looking forward to come back. So we don't anticipate any topics with the absenteeism. So yeah, so in general we are prepared.
Okay, thank you, Maxim. So Matt, the reason I left you for last on this one is because I know Webco has a bit of a different situation, having been as a supplier to an essential industry. So I thought it'd be interesting just to hear a bit more about how Webco has been operating, and has been in this period.
Okay.
But yeah, great.
Yeah, there we go. Great. Yeah, Webco, for those that don't know, Webco is a parts supplier to primarily the heavy-duty truck, bus, trailer, aftermarket areas. We do some small automotive, but primarily truck steering and compressors and things of that nature to braking to the trucking industry. We've been designated as an essential supplier, so we've not shut down at all through any of this activity, and we've gone through it a lot. You know, I run the global supply chain. I started out having the last week of January, we were having our first Corona calls. With China going down like they were, we were trying to protect our supply chain into Europe and the Americas, and then we kind of challenged. You know, we trailed around the world as it was going on. Then we were in Europe trying to protect Europe and focusing on Italy. Then we were in the Americas and whatnot. But we're clearly we're up and running. We're not full. All sites that we have, all of our sites around the globe, India, Mexico, South America, China, every one of our sites are open in some form or another, limited basis. We've made special filings to the various countries to help us to be up and running. We just got some good news today out of India, so we're moving from 10% to 30% of our people for capacity purposes there. So a lot of activities happening there. So you know, we have these daily calls with our purchasing group, every site material planner, our transportation teams, and we're having, like I said, 3 calls a day that I'm involved in managing this and trying to make sure the communications are going, and that we're looking at the schedules, looking at what our requirements are, and making sure we've got material movement, and we've got everyday task lists that get put together based on the urgent items, and how are we working on that? How do we work with purchasing? If one supplier is down or can't do it, do we have alternatives? You know, if this industry is down, we had some chip issues initially when China was going down. How do we find alternative chips? Because they may have been all sourced out of the APAC region, and Europe was still running. How do we find chips to keep our ECUs and those types of productions happening? So very collective activity. So but no, we're up and running, and we're operational. So that's the good news. We've got a lot of lessons learned. I look forward to sharing with everybody today, because I think we've had issues. It's not been perfect by any means, but that's the supply chain we live in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks all three for the kind of snapshot overview there. If I might just maybe starting with Jeff a little bit here, a slight follow-up on that, and this has also been reflected on a few of the questions that have come in. Now, does that restart, Jeff, include Mexico, and also does it take into account for the potential where there may be some bottlenecks in Mexico, whether parts of Mexico that don't start? So is that a North America-wide start, or is it phasing across the different regions?
No, that's our intent. Every one of our facilities in North America, you know, we are going to begin some limited production next week. Of course, as Matt said, we're all on contingency calls and update calls, and it is a very fluid situation within each supplier location, quite frankly. And you know, so we do our best to try to understand that. So our intent, though, is that every facility that we would begin next week some limited using our pipeline, and really not, you know, picking up any new parts per se, with maybe the exception of sequence to parts or on-site or near-site suppliers. But you know, so we're continuing to go through this week and even, you know, early part of next week to make those final decisions about what we'll be doing May 18th to start running our logistics network. So yeah, it's, you know, it's our intent, right? You know, and then we obviously have made some different adjustments along the way as we began the shutdown, and you know, have extended it. So it's fully dynamic, right? So you know, again, and it could change tomorrow, or it could change the Friday before we restart on May 18th fully, right? You know, so we all have to be ready for that.
That's a key point, and I think it's that variation which causes the challenges in the planning of this, no question. Yeah, Max, I mean, Jeff's just raised the point there that apologies, I was muted, wasn't I? Apologies, we do that. Just listening to myself talk. wanted to just kind of quickly follow up on a point that Jeff raised there, which was that Toyota won't necessarily pick up new parts next week in their early ramp-up phase. For Maxim and Matt, as things pick up, is it initially a case of running down existing pipeline and inventory that you have? So will that sustain you for a while, even before, let's say, a Michigan is fully able to open, or even a Mexico? So does that help for a while? And if so, kind of how long before that gets critical? So maybe starting with Maxim. I think you're also muted now, Maxim, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we pay a lot of attention basically to the critical supply chain management. So starting from the beginning, starting back to the beginning of the crisis in January, so we have established a task force focusing on the critical parts and the areas which were highly impacted by the virus. So as you remember, and as we mentioned already, so the crisis started in China, then it's continued in Italy and Spain, and basically, as you know, that so the areas in China and in Italy and Spain and some other parts of Europe, so some of them have been already closed, and we still continue the production in North America. So basically, it was quite difficult to manage the parts availability from these areas. So we managed this successfully. However, right now, of course, we have some excess of inventory due to the short-term decisions of stay order, and the OEMs close the factories quite, I would say, in the short term. So we have excess of inventory for the overseas materials and for the long distance supply chain within the NAFTA region. So of course, this inventory will secure the smooth restart, definitely. So we are covered approximately for the next 2 weeks for some parts even higher. But again, yeah. So we prefer to keep very transparent and close communication with the customers. So we are communicating our constraints with the customers. So and in the end, we can manage this together. So also, as an example, there is one part number which is sourced from Mexico, and we basically secure the flow from China. So basically, there is also Benteler considered as an alternative source from the different locations. So this also happens.
Absolutely. So Matt, again, I know you didn't shut down, but I imagine that there's also been, have some excess inventory right now. Is that something you're looking to run down first? And do you think, do you think there's a risk that you still end up short if other parts don't turn on quick?
We're in a mixed bag, I guess, when I think about my global job. But in regions where we have local supply, it's fairly lean, and whatnot. In our North American operations, we source quite a bit from other regions here, and as a result, when things started slowing down and whatnot, there's that pipeline that we still had stuff coming and chugging along. So we end up, I probably here in the U.S. have too much inventory. Clearly have too much inventory sitting down. We got to burn that up. One of our panel questions referenced the EDIs and whatnot. That's been a real challenge for us, right? The customer, most of the customer EDIs were very strong and aggressive. Even though we knew the plants were shutting down or the plants were down, we still had strong EDI schedules. So we were trying to manually, updating and manipulating stuff. But as a result of all that, we've still got we've got more inventory here in our distribution operations than is needed. But in Europe, we're pretty good. We have fairly lean inventories. We have a long lead time on chips and stuff like that because we make some electronic items. That's I was joking this morning with somebody on a call. He was talking about clearly, his production is down, his lines are down, but his electronics are still coming into him. And I asked him what his lead time was, and I already knew what it was, but he said it was 40 weeks. And I asked him why he didn't shut down the supply chain before the coronavirus started, because that's what it would have taken to stop that. But no, it's a challenge, right? So we've got and all of us have this. When we start back up, our customers will want the green ones, and I'll have all the red ones, and it will be, I'll sit here with everyone will be thinking we're crazy. We got way too much of stuff, but we're asking for premium freight. So it's clearly a challenge for all of us to try to manage through this.
Absolutely. Well, you raised the issue there on the EDI. Obviously, that was the top vote in terms of those challenges. So speaking of wanting the green ones but having the red ones, maybe I turn to Jeff a little bit on that. And from a Toyota point of view, I mean, do you recognize what that characterization which we're hearing from our audience about the production schedules and EDIs not necessarily matching what the reality is, and if so, how? Why is that, and how are you as Toyota, as an OEM, working to try to resolve that? You're still on mute there, so perhaps, oh, yeah, you've just...
Yeah, I think somebody had me muted. Sorry about that. Yeah, so yeah, how did I know I was going to get the EDI question, right? How did I know? Here's the way I want to remind people. We're part of the supply chain too, right? And our customer is the person that actually buys the final vehicle, right? And so we have supply and demand that we have to respond to. I think Matt kind of hit on it a little bit. What our intention of the EDI is we have vehicles that we had basically planned and ordered to be able to be delivered back through March when we start shutting down our North American operations. And so we had to continually to let those orders progress, right? Because our pipeline is such a global thing, right? And it's connected to so many more of our other ERP systems and material systems. And so we couldn't just like turn that light switch off right then and say, hey, we're gonna stop everything because it's, supply chain throughout the world. But, again, just to kind of talk through that is as those vehicle orders were progressing through, then our role is to, through a bill of materials, explode that into parts orders, right? And so we had to let those kind of play out and understand that based on the production schedules back in March and even into April, this was what we were intending, and that's what the pipeline needed to be sustained for. So as we come back online, through EDI, we have made some adjustments to that to maybe more closely mirror what our intentions are. And I think maybe Maxim talked about it a little earlier. We know the most intelligent thing to do is to start really slow and very methodical and very measured, because we all know that any one of a number of risks could stop our intention, right, in our production plans. So what we've been doing with our suppliers is making some small adjustments to those EDIs to maybe more closely mirror what our intention is. But what we're also considering is, we're adjusting our logistics patterns, we're adjusting, and so we've been very much engaged with our supply base to maybe adjust those logistics schedules and define what those intentions and production schedules are. So I think we've adjusted the orders, and again, as we look out a little bit, we're taking some action. But when we come back up, we'll be making those vehicles that we had intended to produce in March.
Right, understood. So maybe Maxim, maybe I can ask you to respond on that. Clearly, you've also faced some issues from OEMs as well. I'm not saying it was Toyota or not, but obviously you've had those issues. How has Benteler been working through that with its customers and its own supply base? Almost. So I think it'll be coming on now in a second.
Okay. Yes, indeed. So the quality of the EDI call-offs is one of the biggest issue right now, and basically all the plants in North America and worldwide are highlighting this topic. So, and honestly speaking, I can understand that because the situation with COVID is changing so rapidly. So, and the OEMs also, they need to take some time to adjust their call-offs. So it takes time. So on our side, we analyzing the call-offs. We're doing the cargo plans. In some cases, we have to manually send our releases to the suppliers in case of some inconsistency in the EDI call-offs. It also takes time. So in the end, it creates some kind of bullwhip effect. So basically, the quality and the timing of the call-offs are getting worse from the OEMs to the tier suppliers. So in this situation, what we are doing in Benteler, and this is what I mentioned already before, we are trying to stay in a very close contact with the customers. So basically, despite the furloughs, despite the shortened weeks, so our SCM departments were and still available. So we are checking the call-offs on the daily basis. We are checking the call-offs, we're analyzing them, we give the feedback to the customer. So together we adjusting them, trying to adjust and eliminate the errors in the call-offs. So this is what we are doing, and this is exactly what we are asking to do to our tier 2 suppliers and to our providers. And so from the Benteler side, we already distributed the official letter to all our tier suppliers saying that the situation is changing very rapidly. So we are doing our best to notify you immediately as soon as we have any changes from the customers. So and we have to all stay flexible in this situation. So another topic with the call-offs, what I would like to highlight is, so because we are analyzing this in as I said on the daily basis, and what I can see currently from the call-offs is that the situation looks quite positive in the future. So at the moment, at least in North America, according to the current call-off overall, we see that the recovery of the market will happen something like in June, which is quite quick. So I see that the level of the call-offs is basically on the pre-crisis level is something like in the middle of June. So which is from my point of view is quite optimistic. So, and again, if having the long supply chains and let's say having optimistic demand in the call-offs, this can also create some difficulties in the future, and the level of inventory, which is currently quite high, could be even higher. So, but
absolutely. So that's an interesting point that I think I might want to turn to Jeff to quickly here. I appreciate no one. The question for everyone is when we get back to normal or when demand sort of recovers. But from the point of view of what Toyota sees, and obviously it's a slow ramp up, which you're planning. But does are you kind of looking to scale up relatively quickly? I mean, do you see room for production to start catching up some pent up demand, as Maxim said, with some of these reflections saying as early as June, or does that seem, from Toyota's planning point of view, a bit ahead of what you see?
Well, we certainly hope so. I think again, I kind of mentioned, to restart our operations, we have to be very slow and methodical to make sure that we can protect our workers, and not just our workers, but our workers' families. So that's that's first and foremost. And then as the each area within the North America kind of restarts and reopens, then it really will be up to the public confidence, right, and understanding and how they feel about purchasing a new vehicle, either economically or whatever. So we have to protect ourselves for the upside, and we have to maintain some upward flexibility. But again, I think our intention is in the month of May, it's just to kind of reconfirm what that new normal operation would look like in this new environment. And then from there, as sales in May kind of we'll get a little better pulse on what that looks like. I will say though, and I think it was reported for our North American sales, our U.S. sales, we were really pleased. Our dealer partners did a great job transitioning from selling in the showroom to doing more online and delivering vehicles to members, to buyers' homes and stuff. So we were really pleased with a little better than what we expected with April sales, and we hope that continues with May. And so I think, as you guys are saying, is we have to be ready to respond to the market, or we're going to find ourselves in an inventory shortage of vehicles.
Matt, again, the picture on the commercial vehicle side is not necessarily always the same, but it's often an interesting indication, I think, probably an early indication of how the economy otherwise is starting to perform. I mean, in terms of your planning and what you're seeing and hearing from customers, are you preparing as well for that start to scale and ramp back up in North America or other regions in a relatively short period of time? Or is it, obviously it's very fluid and dynamic right now, but just some perspective from your side.
Yeah, it's very different by region. Clearly China's back and their production is is very strong. So I mean, they're coming back and trying to make up some of the gaps that were made in North America. Most of the OEs have, or the truck and bus OEs have been down the last 2 to 3 weeks, and our sites have gone down to reflect that. I think they're back right now this week. Most of them are back, with the exception of Mexico. And my view is they're probably back in around 25–30% of what they were before COVID happened. I think that the plans are to increase that activity between now and the end of May and then into June. But I don't think it's going to get, much stronger than 50–60%. I mean, and that's just a guess. I don't know anything. But by the end of into June, but I don't think by the end of the year it'll ever be back to what it was. I think the demand at the end user has changed a great deal. Hopefully it gets back, 80% or higher, but I don't know. We'll have to see if there's a second round of this stuff, as they're talking about. Who knows what's going to happen? But the good news is we're back. The material flow is happening, and hopefully, there's a demand for trucks and the replacement side of that, and it continues, and we're able to continue to march forward, and the economy gets better. That's what we all want. If the guys are selling cars more, trucks are moving them around, it's good for all of us. But I think that it'll be interesting to see what happens, because there's been this pent-up demand, and we'll see how long the customer votes to not buy or buy. And hopefully they get back to feeling comfortable enough to buy again soon in the volumes they were before.
Absolutely, and if they are there, then you certainly want to have been able to produce the products to get them there, which is right. Why the stability and health of the supply chain here is so important. Maybe if I can turn before we go through some audience questions, because there's quite a few, maybe we can turn a little bit to some of the international supply chain picture. Now, Matt, your role is global, so that in effect covers so much for you. But I think, particularly if we're talking about, since you're all based in North America, perhaps the picture there in terms of moving supply to North America now. Where do you see the biggest risks? Are there risks that you're encountering in terms of those long value streams, meeting the production that you have started to plan, even ramping up slowly, and then especially as you kind of look to move a bit more forward? So maybe I'll start with Maxim there, because obviously Benteler is a origin German company. I'm sure you have long value streams out of Europe and elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So the Benteler imports quite a lot of materials from overseas. So the highest volume goes to South Carolina facility in Spartanburg. So as I mentioned, there we are doing the business for BMW. In this specific case, all the suppliers are directed by. So this is not Benteler decision from where to source, but anyway, we have to manage the supply chain. Significant volume goes to Puebla, to Mexico. So therefore, the reliable international supply chain is very important. So so far we were able to mitigate the risks, so to eliminate the risks. But I think that in the next few months, the role of the international supply chain, the service providers, will be very important. So the risk what I see are the following. So the first one is longer lead time. So if we're talking about the sea freight, and I've already started to hear from our service providers that the lead time can become longer. So if it is the case, so then we need to have a very clear and in-time communication from the service providers. So what's going on the market? So how can we react? What kind of actions we need to take to basically to adjust our MRP parameters accordingly. Of course, again, we all trying to avoid the special freight, but the reality is different, and we have to sometime fly the parts, and now the capacity of the air freight is also quite limited. So this is another challenge. Again, the pure parts availability is an issue, because so we are only here in the US, so we are reopened differently from state to state, and also the situation in Europe is also different. So, and we have to see if the parts will be available when we need them. And then again, the topic, what I would say I would say I like to discuss with our service providers, because this is a real issue for us. So this is a delays on the sea freight. So this is black sailings, this is container rolls and everything like that. So, and I think with this crisis, this is not going to be easier. So, and then we'll see. So another topic is the borders. So far I think the situation on the border is quite stable. So I don't see any issues, but again, so nobody knows what will happen. So there are many risks.
Absolutely. Maybe I can turn next to Jeff on that one, just from Toyota as well. I mean, clearly you would have a supply chain out of, I mean, I know Toyota has a lot of localization in North America, but the Japanese imports, I've no doubt, are very important. Japan itself is in a state of emergency, as I alluded to earlier. Do you have particular supply risks, or as Maxime alluded to, is it largely on the logistics chain and the kind of delays and timings out of that?
Yeah, I think you hit on it. I mean, I think Max's point is, there's risk everywhere. I don't think there's any shortage of risk, right? We have to have our finger on the pulse out of every location, but being a Japanese automaker, we are sourced mostly for North American operations here, but we are pretty reliant upon the Mexico region, as well as, more so the Asia region than we are, of course, in Europe. But I think, as we began to shut down our operations, and as those, parts kept coming in from a pipeline standpoint, then we first had to manage that, right? And that was an excess as we shut down our North American operations. Now, as we restart, we feel pretty comfortable about our, long lead time pipelines, to begin with. Now, again, as Maxim kind of hit on, as we begin to ramp that up, and as we get into late May and maybe early June, we're going to have to definitely, keep very close business continuity with those regions and those partners over there to make sure that we have a solid recovery there as well, right? And that may restrict us, but again, we're optimistic. We think before this happened, there was a pretty strong global production and supply chain cadence. So we want to believe that optimistically that each of those regions should be able to recover with us, and then get to a point where we can have that reliability and sustainability. So that's what we're shooting for.
Anything different you'd add to that, Matt? And maybe particularly also, I mean, Maxim raised the issue of logistics providers and the importance there. I mean, what do you think? Is there something that your logistics providers can also be doing to help mitigate some of these risks, or some of this variability and delays and lead times and things like that?
No, I think Max and Jeff said it well, but it's I think we're having weekly conference calls with our service providers to make sure we understand what's happening. As Maximum said, there's fewer sailings. There's boats are in the wrong places. Lead times are going a little bit longer, just because we're shipping less right now as a result of what's going on. So we're trying to not ship half full containers, and so we're shipping maybe every other week as an example versus every week, so that adds time. I think one of the things all of us in the supply chain want most is consistency and reliability, and I think as we get started, I worry about the borders of Mexico and the borders of Canada a bit, because with everything happening, there just hasn't been a flow. And the border guys have, they're not stationed as much, and how fast things get back going. If they haven't staffed at the borders appropriately, we'll have trucks waiting a long time too. So there'll be inconsistency of those flows. So we're worried about that. And if you plan a certain amount of time, it could be a lot longer, just because they're stuck at the border like it was a few years ago. So I think we just want to get volume happening, get it up and moving, get the reliable, repeatable type actions happening, and then you can start trusting a lot of things to happen. But to your point, we are meeting with our suppliers. They're giving us advice. I'm looking for faster modes. We don't want to ever put anything on a plane, but as Maxim said, you have to it sometimes. We found a couple speedboat options out of India to the U.S. It takes 10 days out of the that 5-week lead time. So it takes a week out. That's significant. It's better if you can work on that and try to work on that versus putting on a plane. Our stuff's pretty heavy and bulky, so it's a lot of money to put that stuff on a plane. So we're coming up with creative options. Okay.
It's a good point, and there's actually a lot of questions and a fair number of questions from our audience about, will you need to switch to air freight out of places like Mexico when, if the border is shut or if they're having issues. Clearly, there's so much constraint in the air freight market as it is without the underbelly capacity from passenger freights and the rates. So I suppose, are you looking, you alluded to it, Matt, but Jeff and Maxime are there. Is there a significant effort to look for alternatives now in terms of suppliers or modes? And actually also, I mean, when you do need to turn to this air freight kind of as a necessity, is it clear right now who ultimately is responsible, in the sense that is the OEM have to be responsible here? Does the tier have to pick it up or lower it down? Because this is constraints coming from such an unprecedented situation. I know that would vary in a lot of different situations, but if maybe I can start with Jeff on that.
Good.
For the responsibility part, is that what it is? Yeah, I hear you. No, I mean, I think the way, I think Matt hit it pretty good. We have some very strong logistics partners, and we couldn't do what we do without them. And so we've been really engaged with them. We've continued our service parts operations. I think Maxim hit on it earlier. We're really proud of our supplier partners for, helping us maintain that, good flow of parts to be able to repair vehicles, particularly for those first responders. And, I think you mentioned that it is an essential business because we do need to do that. So, our partners and logistic providers have continued to, persevere through that. I think you asked the question about, when we come back on, who's responsible. I would say that we all are, right? This is an event that none of us could have predicted. It's an event that is much longer than any of us wanted, and I think, from a reliability and sustainability standpoint, I think the first and foremost is that we start the flow of materials again, and whatever venues and modes we have to do to keep that maintained is really what we're after. And then we'll worry about the financial responsibility as we go forward, right? And I think as we've kind of shuttered our operations to begin with, we've all kind of had shared sacrifice, and I think that's been a message that we will continue, is that okay, we want to get things back to normal. We have to have a good steady flow of material. In order to do that, what does it take, right? And what does that mean from a trucking or a marine vessel or airplane or whatever it ends up being? That how do we keep our plants running and our members back to work?
Absolutely, yeah. Shared responsibility.
Maybe I can also
Max,
add.
do you want to add anything?
So from the So in general, in North America, during the last 6 months, we got familiar with a lot of new service providers. So the freight companies, the air freight companies, the custom brokers, and we, let's say, changed significantly our supply chain network. So in most of the cases, these changes were for the better. So we are quite satisfied, very satisfied with the performance of the service provider performance, and so this is much appreciated. But as I mentioned, I think during the next few months, so it will be a very hard time, and we have to be prepared. So the clear message from supply chain community, from Benteler side to the service providers, is that first of all, we have to be very clear and transparent. So what's going on the market? So the communication flow should be really proactive, transparent, clear. So the service provider should stay in touch with the responsible material planners on every Benteler facility. Of course, the data should be very accurate. So because we are relying a lot on the information which is provided by the service providers. For example, this in transit report. So all the decisions regarding the special freight and other decisions are based on this data which is coming from the service providers. Of course, on time deliveries is a topic which we already discussed. So I think the role again of the service providers is very important. So I think the expectations are also quite clear. We're also in touch with the service providers on the regular basis. And back to your question regarding the different mode of the transportation, I think yeah, we at Bentel are permanently looking for the cost reduction opportunity. So now when the volume goes down, this is absolutely reasonable to review the way how we deliver the parts of, for example, to switch from FTL to LTL, or from the full container load to buyer console. So this is what we are doing for sure. So the air freight shipment, so in our case, is really exceptional. So this is something what I said we're trying to avoid, because normally the parts are also quite big. So yeah, but in general, so we are in the permanent process of trying to optimize the freight lanes down, the freight cost.
Absolutely. So there's quite a few questions that have come in, picking up on a point that I mentioned earlier around some, liquidity risks in the supply chain, particularly perhaps particularly at the tier 2, tier 3 level. Is there are you already seeing those some issues there, or is it more of a risk sort of to come? And if so, is there a kind of risk management strategy in place from either Toyota from that side, or from the tier suppliers, in terms of whether the companies will have to offer some support, extend credit, or even something more extreme if necessary? So again, maybe I'll start with Jeff, just partly because Toyota has faced crises before, and I'm sure that it's faced situations like that before with critical suppliers. And is there a strategy in place to deal with that?
Yeah, obviously I don't want to go into any specifics, but as you said, it's our purchasing division, which is headquartered in Ann Arbor, has been doing a really strong effort to understand each of our tier 1 and subsequent tier 2 and tier 3 condition from a financial and return to work kind of thing as well. So as we getting back those surveys and understanding some of that detail, then there's appropriate action that different purchasing buyers and or whatever other support that supplier may need, then we're quick to make sure that we can extend that, whether that's through any kind of financial support or any kind of manpower support or any of that expertise. Then of course we're going to do that, right? Of course we're going to have that discussion. But I think through our confirmation as we go through those, we've seen some already, of course, but we also don't really know what we're going to see going forward, right? And I think it was mentioned earlier, the sooner we can get back into some, I don't know if normal by June is exactly right, but some kind of pace in June that makes suppliers' financial condition better, then we're certainly want to do that for them and as well as for ourselves, right? So the sooner we can get back to some kind of normalcy, I think that'll kind of work itself out. If we can survive, through this April period already, and get into May and some 50% or whatever that number is volume, then coming out of that in June we'll know a little bit better.
Fantastic. Matt, would you add anything from Webco point of view?
No, I think Jeff said it very well. Our purchasing organizations actively sending out the surveys and working with their supply base and looking for risk. It's a global situation. I think we've had a couple of them struggle, and I think we're in the process of seeing more coming, in my opinion, because there's just so many coming on board. But I was reviewing it this morning that there's still 190 suppliers that we have that haven't come back to work yet, even though we're working. So it's that's the good news is that was 220 last week. So they're starting to come back, but they're still not back, and some of them won't come back. And I know our purchasing group is looking to, you always want dual sources, but there's other things that prevent you from having that. But so it's so we're working on, we've had a couple of situations where we've had to resource stuff already. So we're actively engaged in that. But I think Jeff said it very well relative to what we're doing and how you got to work with folks, because it is a shared responsibility as we come back and make this happen. Thanks.
Absolutely. Maxim, what about from the logistics provider standpoint? I mean, we kind of talked about it there as tier supplier risk. Do you think that do you have any signs of fears that the carriers could also pose a risk if they were to run into financial difficulty and snarl up the supply chain?
Well, so this is definitely a very sensitive topic. I think everybody now are very sensitive on time payments, for example. So, and this is what we from supply chain community are trying to ensure from our side, that all the invoices are approved in time and went to the account payables to ensure on time payments. So this is what we are doing. So luckily, as of today, I haven't received any, let's say, warning signals from our carriers. So this makes me feel confident, as I said. So most of our supply chain network is quite new, so we are working with the professional, reliable companies. Yeah, I'm quite optimistic on this one at this point.
That's great. So on this, I've gotten a couple of other questions in, and there's a couple of them which are focused on what I'll broadly categorize as supply chain resiliency, perhaps. So whether there's a kind of efforts or focus now that perhaps particularly in this coming period or looking out of it, whether there might be more emphasis on a resiliency in the supply chain, whether that means a bit more buffer inventory or maybe more regional sources in some cases. There's a lot of ways we can probably dice that. But just if I mean, at the moment we're in crisis restart mode, so I'm not sure about the long-term thinking, but it's a question that's coming up quite a bit. And so maybe again, I'll start with Jeff, particularly the Toyota production system and the lean just-in-time philosophy is the kind of backbone, if you like. Is there a feeling that there'll be some change in the balance of how the operations and the logistics and production strategy is considered?
Great question. I don't think we have those answers yet. I think this crisis, again, we mentioned earlier, is such a global. We've all seen these crises before, but this is probably the most widespread and most longest standing one. And I think first and foremost, we want to just reconfirm that our supply chain from whatever region it is, that we got it sustained and we can continue it. And then our purchasing division will lead any kind of sourcing for the next few major models that we have coming up. But I don't really see how it's such a global economy anymore that I think you have to take advantages of whatever regions offer from a competitive standpoint. And I don't know that just because of this global crisis that we're going to really change any of those strategies. But I think it's still yet to come. I don't have any real defined answers. I'm just trying to give you my personal opinion. Let's get things back to where they were, right? And at least close to where they were. And then from there, then how do we begin to do sourcing and supply chain network optimization after that?
Matt, you're a global guy and certainly in the supply chain, and so you know plenty about the dynamics that go into those sort of decisions and operations. Is there anything further you'd add to that?
It's our business in North America was growing quite a bit, and we were sourcing quite a bit of material outside of the region. So I think our plans were naturally to localize more and manufacture in region, and then have supply base in region. So I think that those plans will continue as we go forward. I think I don't know if this speeds it up or so. I agree with Jeff. How do you just get to normal or whatnot? But I do know if we've had meetings where we're discussing, should we move a production line from here or there to the Americas, just in this downtime with what's happening. Is now the right time to move something and take advantage of the gap to move it here. So we are doing that. I'm working on some business cases to try to move. I wouldn't say the coronavirus is causing me to move it. I think there's an opportunity that's opened up for maybe a window for me to do it in a slower period of time and have it be less disruptive. So we are looking at those opportunities, but if I move it faster, I probably don't have the local supply base that can feed it. So it creates, I might have the tooling and manufacturing here, but I have other challenges to work through, but because it's a very tangled web when you do these things, it's got to be very planned out. So, but no, it's I think there's opportunities there. We just we shouldn't shy away from them if the timing's right. You have to be prepared, I guess, is what we need to be. Boy Scout model or whatever that is. So, okay.
Absolutely, and again, I sort of summarized some of those questions in that topic. Some of the other things people were also asking were, if single sourcing models would be looked at more carefully. I mean, if you wanted to add anything to that, but I think it's in a similar kind of consideration as I think you were alluding to there, Jeff. That, I mean, obviously there's opportunities to look at these, but it's not perhaps the first reaction is perhaps not to make these sort of changes, not at least in the initial phase.
Yeah, again, just to repeat that is, I think we've always, Toyota has always, expressed our desire to, build cars and build vehicles where we sell them, right? And, but it's always a business decision. And I think as Matt says, I'm sure some of our corporate strategy members, as well as our purchasing division, is looking at the sourcing as we gear up for new production facilities and/or vehicles. That's always a consideration. It's where can you define the supply chain well enough where you can reduce your costs as well as make the commitments that you want to do from a business standpoint.
Very good. So there's a question I hadn't thought of, but so I thought, oh, that must make it a really good question if I haven't thought of it. So, are any of you particularly worried that insurance companies? Let me pull up the question so that I get it correct. Pardon me for a second. So, are you concerned about credit insurance companies reducing or even suspending credit lines for companies in the automotive industry? I suppose, particularly from your point of view, in the supply chain, is that something that is coming up in the crisis discussions and worries, or not so at this point?
Not come up in any discussion that I've been involved in. So.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. It's not in my, in kind of my scope of responsibilities. I'm not sure that, again, from a supplier standpoint, and, if you kind of look at the, global economy, there's lots of different types of incentives going on. So I think that, credit should be not a major consideration, but I think each situation is a little different. So it depends on the strength of that company, but no, it's not really within my scope at all.
Fair enough. Okay. Just and if you're worrying what that buzzing was, that was Amazon delivering my brand new Lexus, I think, and some of my web ventilator service parts.
So Louis paying you pretty good, huh? Or he was, right?
No, that was well, I shouldn't talk about what we exchanged to get you on the show, Jeff. Right? No, I wanted to pivot slightly, just because obviously as we restart, and this is obviously well documented, that it comes with a lot of additional requirements. Clearly in the plants, there's a lot more social distancing requirements, PPE, all these kind of considerations. And I wanted to reflect a little bit on what that might mean for the supply chain and logistics, be it in terms of the supply chain for that material, for how you are operating with drivers and providers, what changes you might be looking at, for example. I thought I might start with you, Matt, in part because, again, Webco has actually kind of been at it longer, at least 6-8 weeks longer, if you like, having operated during this period. And I know you had a couple of points and documents are prepared, which I'll actually flip onto the screen because I think there was some points out of that. So maybe we can start with you, Matt, there.
Okay.
And I'll share.
Yeah, this particular document that you see here is we've been in discussions because several of our offices or the office areas have been closed and people are working from home. So we've been having meetings about how to get people back into the offices and bring people back to work. And we came up with this, and we've sent this out. We've had conference calls with all of our employees about being your own boss, which the boss is, back on site safely. And then telling people what they're going to experience, right? And we've really tried to plan how we're going to have people back in the office. Not everybody needs to be back. We've experienced that we can work from home, but we want to get people back in the office. But some of the key things are the questionnaires that they're going to have to ask. For over a month now, we're checking the temperature of every person every time they come into the building. And if you're over 100, you go home and set those expectations for the safety of that person and their family, as well as the safety of everybody on site. So how do they take that personal safety approach to help everybody else in the site so we can remain open? So we're asking everybody to wear masks every day. We're providing masks for everybody. We've got 4 to 6 months, depending on our site, masks that we've been able to procure. We bought enough that we actually gave masks to the local hospitals and all of our communities and whatnot to take advantage of that as well and be socially responsible as well. When this one here, when at the end of February, when all this was coming and we were essential, we put out the 10 golden rules for how we wanted to make sure we were safeguarding our employees and making sure our operations remain sustainable and can work through this. So you can see here again, we published this and we have this on our site, who's allowed into the building, who's not. We basically don't let visitors in unless you need to, the electricity is not working. We need to have somebody come in like that to come in. We've got sanitation spots where you're to wash your hands every day at 11:45. Everyone puts down their stuff everywhere, and we clean everything, right? We want to be very physical that we're doing that, physically visible to everybody, so they see us doing that and they feel safe. And that's some of the feedback we've gotten back from our employees, is they feel safe when they're in the office. And that's allowed folks to want to come back. When this first happened, we had some issues with people not wanting to come in. They didn't, they were just scared because of all the noise that was going on out there. But by doing these things and having a plan and having a communication plan and making sure we put protocols and procedures in place, our team feels very safe. I would also say, we've had to really plan, and we're operational this way, but how people move through the buildings. We've got one-way doors. We've got elevators that only, you only go to certain floors on it. You can't have so many more people in an elevator. Steps going up and down in the building. That's a big exchange of stuff. We have stairs that you only go up in one area, and there's different steps that you go down. So we've been very clear on those types of actions for folks. I would also ask everybody, when you're putting your plans together, whatever your plans are, make sure you plan for what happens if somebody comes down with the virus and they've been in your place. We've had that happen, and one of our sites had that situation where it was Easter weekend, and somebody worked up until Wednesday, and they notified us on Saturday that they were positive. And then, so we had a written protocol of what we were going to do, but we didn't think we were going to have to use it. But it caused us all to work that weekend a lot, because we shut the plant down. We brought in people to clean it and whatnot. We were down on Monday. So what's your plan for when you have it? We looked at video. Who did the person come in contact with? We notified all those people that they needed to stay home, for a week of just making sure that things were safe. So have a plan. But there's many things that you need to work through and worry about. How many? We took half the chairs away, 3/4 of the chairs away in our cafeterias. We expanded the cafeterias. There's just a lot to do the 6-foot social distancing, and as simple as going when you're on break. How do you keep so many people going into the restroom? And you got to have a line outside, and how do they manage it themselves? Because I don't want to sit there and manage that. But how do they have a process? There's 4 people inside, and then here's the square, the check marks on the outside to get in. So there's a lot to think about as you're preparing your site to come back. How do you protect the safety of everybody? How do you make sure it's clear? Here's the rules. If you test more than 100, you're going home. And so you're not arguing. You got to test it outside. If you leave, you're testing you when you come back. So don't sit in the sun outside and smoke a cigarette and come back in, because if you go more than 100, you know, you're going to be going home. So there's a lot more, but
just another reason not to smoke, kids.
Exactly. So there's a lot. So it's a lot.
Well, great. Thanks for sharing that. That's really useful. Maybe, I mean, I know we're coming up close to the 80 minutes that we promised, and but you know, so we won't keep everyone too much longer. But you know, Maxim, did you want to add anything from? Again, I know Bentley is just getting going here, but again, perhaps in your, you know, from the point of view of how you're managing drivers, logistics providers, and safety aspects there, what impacts do you see it having for your company?
No, well, in general, so I think I agree with Matt. So we are respecting, so at the facility which we just started, so we're respecting all the guidelines from the government. So I think the employees appreciate this. So regarding the truck drivers, so basically everybody supposed to wear the masks. So we asking them to stay in the truck. So we don't want them to come in basically to the building. So we in most of the facilities we also install the outside restrooms. So we also implement a Dropbox for the documents, so we really minimize the contact with the plant employees. So the topic is really sensitive. A lot of attention to this one, and yeah, we are still working on it, I would say. So the more facilities are coming to and in a few weeks. So and yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Maybe Jeff, just again, I guess SOD is clearly now in the going to the next phase of it. What would you add to that?
No, I mean, I think what Matt shared, I really, you know, commend him for sharing that. And I think, you know, we all understand that safety and health isn't a competitive advantage. And we've done a lot of that sharing back and forth across different industries, as well as, you know, even competitors. You know, what are those best practices to protect our you know, our people, as well as the people's families, the communities that which we operate. And so, you know, any of those good best practices, and it very much, you know, we're working on different playbooks and have shared those with our logistics partners, much as what Matt had kind of outlined, you know. And I think as we begin to operate, you know, we're setting those protocols for, you know, how our truck drivers and LP partners, you know, interact with our members, as well as our members interact with themselves. So, you know, again, I think there's a lot of smart, talented people from our side, as well as other industries, that we're leveraging that to understand what's the best way to operate.
Sorry, I was muted there. Thank you, Thank you everyone for sharing that. You know, I think it's important for how everyone's working together in this next phase, that safety is going to matter. I think we do realize that we're not going to be operating at anything like, well, that Lexus is really persistent today. Sorry, they're not. You know, we're not going to be anything at full capacity right off, and the safety should come first, and we need to work through those issues. I think we're kind of at the end here, but I think just to kind of as a last, give it opportunity for a last point of a quick one, a kind of last hope, if you like, that any of you might have. We talk about crises and you know, talk about the opportunities that may come of them. And again, I'm not for a second making light of the difficulties that we're facing, not least on the health side, but also in our businesses. But what's one thing that you're hoping comes out of this crisis? Either a change that you see already that we continue, or something positive which we may, you know, in the supply chain world kind of take forward with us. You don't all have to answer if you don't have it, but if anyone would want to finish on those thoughts, I think that might be a nice way to say to send off our global audience.
Okay, I'll start. Go ahead, Matt. Sorry. Yep.
That's all right. Go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say, you know, I think we've, you know, again, it's a very tragic crisis, and I don't want to make any kind of light of it, but the one thing I've learned in the 30 plus years in the supply chain industry is you have to take advantages of the learning that you're forced to, respond to. And sometimes those things really help you in your everyday normal world, right? And so the things that we've done from a process management and reaction standpoint, how can we leverage those to make ourselves even stronger as we come out of this? And again, I think we rely on a lot of our talented and smart people to say, oh, okay, we can adapt this process. And so there's a lot of good learning opportunities that we're going to leverage moving forward to make us even stronger.
It's I've thought about this. One of the things that surprises me is, from our daily meetings we're having, at the end of the day, I have a meeting with all of our lead salespeople and all of our, it's a North American meeting with all of our plant leadership and material planners and logistics folks. But I'm a lot closer to our sales team right now and to our purchasing team. I mean, these meetings have made us tighter together. We're more bonded together. We're chatting. We're having open dialogue that we really didn't have before. And this crisis has brought us together. We've gone through the storming, norming kind of a thing, but now in discussions with each other. How do we try to get the EDIs better, or whatever the topic is? We are having real open dialogues, and I hope that as we go forward, that relationship through S&OP and the SOP process and all the other things is just going to make us tighter, and I see benefits coming as a result of it. So that's it for me.
So from my side, I think it's a little bit, at least from my point of view, a little bit too early to talk about the lessons learned, at least for us, because I think to shut down the plants, it was relatively easy. So of course we had to face some challenges, but anyway, so it's comparing with restart and to ensure the sustainable normal life. I think this is the real challenge, and I think we will in the next months we will see how it will go on. But like you said, every crisis opens an opportunity. So we can see now how can we work in the new reality. So basically, all the processes are managed in a virtual world. So and it works pretty well. So I hope also that, and I agree with Matt here. So this importance of S&OP, it was never as important as it is right now, because it's all about the forecasting, the inventory planning, the demand planning, and I believe that this. Let's say this process and this high attention to this process will be carrying over to the post-crisis times for sure. So yeah, and of course we all have to review and to improve our contingency plans in our supply chains. I think this is what we can do and to make this lessons learned from the crisis.
Well, I think that's an excellent point at which, to kind of end the panel discussion here, because I suppose my hope, obviously, all of the tragedy, certainly not to take any of that for granted, but in terms of the industry, that sharing and connectivity across companies, across divisions and functions and companies, competitors, suppliers, partners, as is partly evident in this round right here. So exchanges like this are just one small example from my side of what we can and should as an industry continue to do. So I want to thank each of you for taking the time to do that with us in a public forum in the midst of a crisis. It does take, we do appreciate you doing that, and I know our audience. So before I sort of close, I just and let you get back onto your day, and I'm sure many other crisis meetings besides. Please, thanks again from our side, and we look forward to continuing this dialogue. We had lots of questions from the audience, which in the end we just couldn't finish in 80 minutes. So we'll endeavor together with you to pose some of the questions that we can answer, so that we can get some answers back and share them, if that's okay with all of you, so we can work on that. So I want to thank each of you, Matt Pullman from Webco, Jeff Esses from Toyota, Max and Sarah from Benteler. Thanks very much to all of you. Wishing you and your families and your colleagues, of course, the best, and then all the best as we continue to ramp up the supply chain. So thanks again to all of you. Thank you. Okay, great. Well, thanks as well to you, our audience. Yes, thanks again, guys. So thanks as well again to you, our audience, for joining us. For, you know, we like to over deliver a bit on our live stream hours. But when we have this many great guests, we do automatically extend them to 80 minutes. Today we've gone a little bit further than that, but I'm sure you think it's worth it. We'll make the video available afterwards. We will be sharing the slides. You'll all get an email with a link to that. So watch out for that. It'll be on our website. I put a link in the chat through earlier. I'll send it through again. We'd really appreciate any feedback you have for us on these live streams. That's links over to you right now. They're part of a series, as you know. It's part of our Festival of Transformation, and something we're continuing not only every week, but there's more we're building, and we're looking at other things to do. And so it's really interesting and important for us to have your feedback. So, you know, thanks again. And one of the, you know, just before I close, just to, you know, I usually like each week to point you to some additional reading on our platforms. So if I can just, you know, call your attention there quickly to, if you want more information on how the plants are developing, and then there, please check out our blog on AMS, Automotive Manufacturing Solutions, for the latest on the openings and shuts. You know, I sent you a link through earlier. If you want to read more about consolidation in the industry, please check out our latest analysis there. And we've also got a great digital edition that we've just launched, which is on our website. We'll share the links with you in that presentation. Check them out on our site. Keep following with us. Stay with us for our ongoing Automotive Festival of Transformation across the spring and summer. Our partners this month are CNW, Courier Network. We've got a great calendar coming at you next week. You know, it came up a lot today, Mexico. So we're going to be spending specific time looking at what's happening in the Mexican industry. It's good timing because the sector is set to kind of ramp back up. So we need to kind of go through some issues. There's also the USMCA to deal with. So lots of stuff to talk about there. There were other questions today about service parts and aftermarket. So we're going to come back to that subject in 2 weeks, and we'll have a bigger update for you again at the end of the month. So thanks again for everyone for all your time. I hope you find it useful and valuable. Another you know, all the best again from here, our whole team in London. Wishing you a safe and healthy week. We look forward to seeing you next week at next week's live hour. Thanks again.